Okay, so here's what we've been sort of playing up all week, and that's the next phase of the French Revolution and how things are going to change. They start innocently enough with that document that we assigned you guys to read uh, yesterday or Wednesday. And that is that National Assembly. Remember, they formed out of the Third Estate, and the king didn't dissolve them. And then they kept meeting, and they basically, in the tennis court oath, said, we're not going to stop meeting until we get a constitution. Well, they don't technically get a constitution yet. What they get is a list of guidelines for their constitution. And they call that the Declaration of the Rights of Man and Citizen. Right? And there is a picture of it right here. Now, this is the fancy version that was put up on, on placards and stuff with all the decorations. But essentially, it is just a statement of ideals that any constitution that they do write should uphold. Functions very much like the Declaration of Independence did in the United States. And so you've read a bit of it, and so you know essentially it calls for legal equality for everyone, but also protection of property rights. It calls for due process of law. That's stuff we've been studying since the beginning of the year, basically. Right. But that's complicated. I mean, if you look at it, that's a lot of writing. And one of the key things that we're going to see here throughout the course is if you want to lead a revolution, you have to get the common people with you. You have to have ideas that they can appreciate and things that meet their needs. We're going to see this in Russia. And here, what they do is they boil down that whole complicated Declaration of the Rights of Man and Citizen into a 3-word phrase: liberté, égalité, fraternité, which means liberty or freedom, equality, and brotherhood. Okay, you want a nice short slogan, right? That's easy for people to remember, like "Make America Great Again," things like that. I like Ike. Essentially things that people will remember. And so that's essentially what people are fighting for. The average person in the street who's defending the revolution, they want to create a country of free, equal, and brotherly people. And so we're still at a point now where we're meeting in Versailles. Louis is still part of the process. The National Assembly is negotiating with him. But then the people leading the revolution make their first serious mistake. And that is in trying to control the Catholic Church. So if you look down here at the bottom, there's a political cartoon. Here is a big fat bishop, a churchman, and we have the secular powers. They're going to try and put them in a wine press and squeeze them like a grape, because the church has lots of land and money, and the revolution needs land and money. And so they want to squeeze that out of the church, and they also want to control the church because they view the church as part of their old oppression, right? You had the First Estate was the church, and they want that to be broken down and to become much more part of the people. And so they seize church lands, and they're going to use those to back up a revolutionary money that they're going to issue called assignats, which we might get to. And they're going to tell priests, you have to either quit being a priest, or as a priest, you're going to swear your loyalty is to France and not to Rome, but to the French government and not the Pope. Or you got to leave. So many clergy do take the oath and become state employees rather than church employees, but many clergy don't take the oath and essentially become outlaws. And many also leave. And this alienates a bunch of people who otherwise would have been for the revolution, particularly in the countryside. As you may have noticed, people in rural areas tend to be more religious than people in the big cities like Paris, right? And they're alarmed at this, at the government trying to take over the church. They're all for land reform and legal equality and all that. But then when the government says, no, the church is an organ of the state, they lose a lot of support with the rural peasants. And France is 90% rural, okay? And guess who makes up the army? It's peasant boys, okay? So this is going to be a serious mistake in the long run for the revolution. And divisions are going to start to develop within the revolutionary government. This always happens. If you and your friends all agreed you needed to overthrow the school and get rid of the leadership, and that's all you agreed on, you'd probably be successful because there's a lot more of you than there are of us. But after you took over, then there'd be disagreements. These people want school to be this. These people want the whole school burned down and turned into, a large skate park and trampoline center. There'll be all these different groups. And they would start to fight amongst themselves over what was the revolution for? Why did we take over the school? And that's what's happening here in France. What is France supposed to become? What was evil and needs to be cut away, and what should be kept? And there will be a lot of different answers to that. Their first that they try to do, and the initial members of the National Assembly, those educated lawyers and doctors of the Third Estate, they essentially wanted to be Britain. They wanted to be England. And so we're going to get a constitution in 1791 that makes France Britain, basically. You've got a constitutional monarchy, guarantee of civil rights, voting for people, or men only, of property, right? And it creates a system very much like the British system. Where am I? And they're going to replace the National Assembly with a legislative assembly. And it's going to have just one house. And by that, I mean, remember Parliament had the House of Lords and the House of Commons, and they could check each other's power the way Montesquieu wanted. Or our Congress has the Senate and the House of Representatives. Well, the French government has just one legislature. And that means if you get control of that one body, even by one vote, you control the entire government. And this is going to be a problem soon, okay? Because if you have radicals take control of one part of your government, they get all of it. And these radicals split into several factions. All right. Now, we've had the revolution. We're having a new government. We got fancy documents saying what's what. But guess how many of the original problems have been solved? 0. Okay. People are still starving. Okay. There's still massive poverty in France. All right. And people are going to split over how to solve that. And so we're going to get radicals, moderates, and conservatives in this legislative assembly. And if you've ever heard people, especially these days in the media, if you talk about people being on the left or on the right, or oh, I'm a centrist, right? On the left means you are more radical, right? You're more for radical changes. On the right, well, my hands are opposite for you guys. On the right means you're conservative. You want to keep things the way they are, or even turn the clock back and make things the way they were before. And if you're a centrist, you're in the middle. You're not extreme on either side. That comes from this time in France, when in the meeting hall for the Legislative Assembly, the radicals sat on the left, the conservatives, the monarchists sat on the right, and everybody else sat in the middle. That's where we get that from, the whole left-right thing. That's where that comes from. A couple of groups. We have the émigrés. These are nobles who, remember the Great Fear when their houses got burned down and their documents got torched and stuff? They fled the country and went to live with their rich cousins in Austria and Prussia and what we now call Switzerland. And they fled, and they're living in exile, right? They emigrated. That's what they're called, émigrés. And essentially, they want the king not just to stay in power, but to have his power back the way it was before, when the First and Second Estates were running things. And we'll get another group, which I have pictures of here, because you can picture what nobles look like, but the sans-culottes. And the sans-culottes, it says here the lower class. The sans-culottes are not the poorest of the poor. These are the working people of the cities, all right? These are shopkeepers, printers, people, blacksmiths, people that have trades. And sans-culotte means that they're not wearing the knee breeches. If you look at those pictures of Louis and all that, and they have the knickers, right? The pants stop at the knee, and then they have a fancy stocking and a high-heeled shoe. Well, these sans-culottes are working folks. And so essentially they just mean we wear pants. We don't have culotte. So here's an idealized version of a sans-culotte as a French patriot with the tricolore, the flag of France. And, well, first of the revolution, but now the flag of France. And then here's the British version of the sans-culotte. Basically, and we talked about this guy a lot, right? They are serving the guillotine and chopping off all these heads, and they're bloodthirsty savages. So here's one view, here's another view. Now, they're having those meetings, and what the Constitution of 1791 is arguing for is a constitutional monarchy. And that's what some of the moderates and the conservatives want. Hey, we can fix the legal system. We can fix the tax system. We can reduce the power of the church a little, but we're going to keep a monarch. And what happens that greatly erodes their ability to have a moderate solution is the king himself tries to run away. Okay. He tries to escape France and go live with, remember, his wife's from Austria, Marie Antoinette. He wants to go live with her cousins, okay, and basically organize an army to come back and defeat the revolution and put him back in power. And they wear disguises, and here's a picture of it. But the disguises don't fool the border guards near Varennes, which is on the border of France and Holland, and they get found out and they get arrested and taken back to Paris. So now, if you're trying to argue to have the king still have power, he just tried to run away and join forces with another country to destroy your revolution. That really that really weakens your argument. And so then things are going to get nasty. All right. The Austrians and the Prussians want Louis to be back in charge. And the revolution didn't do itself any favors, when it issued a document promising that, hey, people of Europe, we'll help you overthrow your kings too. So all the rest of the kings of Europe were like, no, that's not going to happen. And so they said, we've got to crush the revolution. First of all, we can't let it spread beyond France, and we need to crush it in France as well and put our cousin Louis back on the throne. And so France declares war on Prussia and Austria. And so they're fighting two of the biggest powers in the world now. And war only makes your economy more strained. All right. And we didn't really talk about this that much, but the Prussians have the best army in Europe at this time. And they are on the move against the French army, and they're close to Paris. And you're going to hear this again a few times in this class. The Prussian forces are threatening to attack Paris. And there's all sorts of rumors going throughout the city that people inside are conspiring against the revolution, and they're going to help the Prussians and the Austrians take over and help the king get back on his throne. And so word goes out that a lot of these royalists, these people who are conspiring, that there's a plot. And the plot is that just as the Prussians are getting close to Paris, all the people will be let out of the jails, all the anti-revolutionaries, and they will rise up from within while the Prussian army attacks from the outside. And so a mob gathers in Paris, fueled by these rumors. And how many times have we seen that, right? We got the March on Versailles, we got storming of the Bastille. Here's another one of these journées, another mob action, all right? And they invade the jails, and they kill everybody they find there, all right? And really, in the city jails, are there that many people there because they are political prisoners? Not too many. Most of the people they're slaughtering are drunks and thieves, prostitutes, people committing petty crimes, but they also round up any priests or seminarians they can find who refused to go with the plan of the state taking over the church, and they kill all of them too. So they slaughter thousands of people, and this is called the September Massacres, right? And they kill everyone they find in the jails, and any clergy that are still associated with the church. And so this is when the bloodletting finally gets too much for a lot of people outside France who had supported the revolution. Now they're seeing just chaos and carnage. And here you have a drawing of the time of the people breaking into the jails and killing everyone they find inside, and then heading on to the next one. So now we've got our third massive bloodletting of the revolution, and it still is going to get worse. And so this huge mob in Paris stays together, and they surround the Legislative Assembly, and they force them to pass a legislation dissolving the monarchy and deposing King Louis and calling France a republic. And so they dissolved the king, and then they all went home, scared for their lives because of this huge angry mob, which had already killed thousands of people. And then they decide that whole Constitution of 1791, no king, no constitution. We're going to have to start all over. And so they're going to draft a new constitution. And you may remember when we talked about America, the meeting that you have to make a new constitution is called a convention. And so the National Convention replaces the Legislative Assembly, which had replaced the National Assembly, which had replaced the Estates General. So hopefully you're keeping up with that. And so their job is supposed to be to write a constitution and form a republic. France will now be a republic, the way that Rome was before it became a monarchy. And so the National Convention meets. We get more factions, all right? The Jacobins are a political faction. Here's a picture of them. And see, Le Club des Jacobins, right? This was initially a political club, like a political debating club, like we have on campus, like the Young Democrats and Young Republicans. There could have been a Jacobin club on campus. And initially, they just get together to debate politics and talk about policy. It's for people that like talking about that kind of thing. And in one of the biggest chapters, they meet in a former Jacobin monastery. That was a religious order. And so they get the name Jacobins. But they're going to go from political society to terror apparatus very quickly. Right? And so they become the political voice of all these changes that have been forced by the bloodthirsty crowds of sans-culottes in Paris, and they're going to demand radical changes. One of the first things they do is they put the king on trial, and after a close vote, not as close as the one that killed Charles I, but Louis XVI is found guilty of treason, and as you saw in the video, etc., and he becomes one of the first people, after Pelletier, to be beheaded by the guillotine. All right, and we don't need to talk about that. We've talked plenty about the guillotine. Meanwhile, while all this is happening inside France, they're still at war with Prussia and Austria, and soon they're going to be at war with Britain as well. But France, remember, it is the biggest country in terms of people, and it is one of the wealthiest countries in terms of resources. And now this French army of citizens who are fighting for a new type of free France, they begin to win, and they begin to push the Prussians and Austrians back out of France. But does that do anything to relieve hunger or taxes or poverty? No, they still haven't addressed the core issues. Now, afraid that Prussia and Austria can't get it done on their own, Britain, Spain, and Holland also join in. So basically, it's France versus Europe. And France is holding its own, oddly enough. And 1793 is also the year that the National Convention finally comes up with a new constitution, the Constitution of 1793, but it's immediately suspended because they're at war. And they say, we don't have time for a constitution right now. So that constitution will actually never take effect. What they do is issue something called the Levy en Masse. And here's a picture of it down here. And they realize we're going to have to fight the rest of Europe. So to do that, we're going to have to make a total commitment. So this really becomes the first effort at total war that we're going to see in the West. And we're going to see it a lot more in the next semester. But essentially, the Levy en Masse says that every single person in France is part of the war effort. So if you're a military-aged man, you can be drafted, or you're making things necessary for the war effort. If you're a child or a woman or an elderly man, you need to be growing food for the troops, spinning cloth for the troops. Everyone's part of the war effort. And if you're not fighting, you're helping those who are fighting. And if you are not explicitly helping the war effort, you're a traitor. And traitors need to be punished. And there's a year from July 1793 to July 1794 that we get the punishing of traitors, and that's called the Reign of Terror. And that's when the guillotine really starts working overtime. Now, there are a lot of people, like we said, going all the way back to the civil constitution of the clergy who think the revolution's already gone too far. And so they're like, we'd like to stop now, please. There's a lot of people think it hasn't gone far enough. And so there is a huge divide within the country, sound familiar, over is the revolution done or does it have more to go? And at the head of it all is this man, this young lawyer whose nickname was the Incorruptible, because he's the true believer. He really believes in the revolution. You can't bribe him. You can't blackmail him. Okay, he exists for the revolution to succeed. And he is the head of the Jacobins. And he is going to rule France for a year. okay, as the head of a committee. Right. This thing's called the Committee of Public Safety. And now that sounds pretty good, right? Like something one of your parents might volunteer for, to make sure that the crosswalks are well lit and, there's not stray animals around and people obey the speed limit in school zones. That's not what this is. The Committee of Public Safety isn't for your safety. It's for the safety of the revolution. And its goal is to wipe out anybody that could potentially threaten the revolution. And through desiring to protect the revolution, the Committee of Public Safety controls every aspect of French life, right? Economics, they determine, how much grain you'll grow, or how many pairs of shoes you'll make, or how many weapons you'll make, and what price you'll get to sell them to the army for. They control prices, they control wages, they're in control of the military, and they are in control of the political discourse in the country. And their time in power is called the Reign of Terror, because Robespierre's most famous quote is, "In order to make an omelet, you've got to break some eggs." And for Robespierre, the omelet was the revolution, and he was going to crack as many eggs as he had to make this revolutionary omelet. And so he's willing to kill anybody that is even potentially against the revolution. In fact, you can't be neutral anymore. You have to be actively for the revolution, or you're a traitor. And eventually this gets messy, because then they send agents all over France and have domestic spies saying, this person spoke against the revolution, that person spoke against the revolution. And if we were to have trials for all these people and find out what really happened, well, that takes a lot of time, right? Think all the way back to your island projects you did the first week, and you had to figure out, how are we going to tell if people are guilty? And that's a pain, right? We'll have to have witnesses and evidence and a trial. We don't have time for that. We're fighting the rest of Europe. So they passed the law of suspects, which essentially says being a suspect is the same as being guilty, because we don't have time to figure out whether or not you really did it. So better safe than sorry. So you'd be rounded up, arrested by the secret police, and then you'd be held in a big area, and then you'd have your day in court where they would read your name, pronounce you guilty, and you'd go out back and have your head cut off by the guillotine. All right? So this is a very efficient system of justice. It's very fast. Okay, it's not at all fair, but it's very fast, and it creates what Robespierre wanted to create, which is terror. He's going to terrify the people into completely devoting themselves to this war effort. And thousands die. Once it really gets up and running, they kill Marie Antoinette, because they're just not really sure what else to do with her, because her husband's already been killed. And of the tens of thousands, and it's actually, if you expand it throughout France and other massacres, it's hundreds of thousands of people that are murdered during this time. And the vast majority of them, just regular folks. The revolution was against the first and second estates. All right. The people that are falling victim to the Reign of Terror are peasant farmers and shopkeepers, who might be caught charging too much for their bread, or holding back some grain. Those are the people heading to the guillotine. All right. So this revolution really is costing the blood of just regular men and women. Ultimately, the fever breaks and the terror ends. So what happens is, this is a famous scene here. I'll explain to you what's going on. Robespierre is constantly coming up with new lists of suspects. These people are against the revolution. These people are against the revolution. And ultimately, Robespierre starts to kill his own friends. All right. Now, here's a rule. If you want to be a totalitarian dictator, as we'll see again next semester, the first step, you have to kill all your friends for reasons we'll talk about. All right. But you can't kill your friends until you make new friends to help you kill your old friends. And that's the mistake Robespierre made. He started killing his old friends with no new friends. And so the remaining friends got together and said, we could be next. And so they stand up in the National Assembly or the National Convention, and they denounce Robespierre before he can denounce them. And so he is arrested. He's arrested in his offices. And here he is shot in the mouth. And now there's disagreement about this. Some say he was trying to commit suicide, but instead of shooting himself in the brain because of all the commotion, he shot himself through the jaw. Others people say it happened just during the scuffle. A lot of people at the time, especially Robespierre supporters, thought that the the captors shot Robespierre in the mouth so he couldn't speak in his own defense at his trial. So during his trial, he's laying on this table in agony with half of his jaw blown away. And he is, just like he had done to thousands of people, he is found guilty and has his head chopped off. And with this, people are like, you know what? We're tired of the revolution. We're tired of this reign of terror. The military has held on. We've held off all those European armies. We can start to govern ourselves differently. And they're going to pick a very new form of government called the Directory, which is going to be a type of government that is designed not to be able to do much. All right. They saw if someone has a lot of power and can do a lot with Robespierre, we don't like that. So the government they're going to make with yet a third constitution of 1795 is a government that instead of a single leader, it has a legislature with two houses, and there's 5 men that act sort of like president, okay, like king, and they have to agree for anything to get done. Imagine if we had 5 presidents and they had to agree for something to get done. Things wouldn't get done. But that's the point. They don't want efficient government because that costs them thousands of lives. And so they make on purpose this inefficient kind of government, which pretty soon gets corrupted to the point that they want to get a new government. And the only thing keeping this new government, the Directory, in power is the army. And the man who controls the army is Napoleon Bonaparte. And Napoleon realizes that the government can't exist without him, so he might as well be the government. And that's how Napoleon becomes the dictator of France and soon will be emperor of Europe. And that's the story for next week, as you can see from the slide. Okay, there it is. And now you've got some guided reading to do and a good weekend to have.